This means that everything else is append or attached to it. So these are the appendages, the pectoral and the pelvic girdle. Those are attached to it. Okay? Your job is to learn all the bones. Okay? If you take a look at the skull, if you have one in front of you, if not, go over at somebody else. Okay? Notice we said we have a cranium and facial bones. Okay? The cranium, you have bones that had to be fused to form them. This means that before they were fused, they were individual bones. How do I know that? I sew them together. And this is, if you look carefully, there are these sutures or these sewing that attach them together. So for this, the sutures are going to be your clue as to where the next bone begins. So I have a frontal or coronal, that's why you had your section, frontal bone. I have a sagittal, okay? And then on the side, I have a funny S1, squamous. In the back, I have a funny L1, lumboid. These are the sutures, these are the markings, and this is what your list is asking you to know. Because for the sutures, that separates the frontal from my parietal bones. Notice I have two parietal bones, one frontal bone. Initially, the frontal bone was actually two, but the fusion is just that now it's one. Okay? And then, of course, I have my squamous that separates the parietal from my temporal. I have my lumboid suture that separates my temporal from my occipital. Okay? This is important because that's what the muscles are built on. That's what the nervous systems are built on. That's what all the other systems are built on. Okay? So then that means if I have a muscle here, well, it's my frontalis. If I have a muscle here, it's my temporalis. That's why we do the skeletal system first. Okay? For my facial, same thing. I have sutures that separates the bone. So I know from the very beginning, this is my nasal, excuse me, and I'm going to look for the next suture. There's a little line. Once I see the little line, that means there's another bone. The next bone is the maxilla that kind of runs all over the place. And then after the maxilla, I have to look for the little line. I find the little line, that means the next bone is the lacrimal. Then I look for the next little line, that means there's another bone. Okay, very important. The bony markings, those little lines, those sutures, are what delineates the next bone. Okay, so then that's my F mode. Okay. There are many different views in your text. Okay, again, because you're only spending 3 weeks with those, the only view that we're going to use, let's say for example, the sphenoid is going to be this lateral view. You don't need to go into the interior and look, or you don't need to get a sagittal cut to look. We don't have that anyways. So stick with the simple view. It's right here. I'll say, oh yeah, this is my coronal, my frontal. This is my squamous. Therefore, that bone in between must be the sphenoid bone. Okay? And that's how I know that bone is. So the bone actually runs all the way inside as part of those pneumotax bones. Okay? Everybody clear on this?
So you're not gonna open it for the last.
For these parts, I'm not going to open it. So if I open it, there's different things on the inside. Right? So you have this little space here. You have this hole here. So that's a different part. So you cannot see the space from the outside. So I have to open it. Okay? So then I have really, I think 1, 2, 3 markings on the inside for you. Your sella turcica, your foramen magnum, and what else? There was something else.
The mandible.
Cristogali, I'm sorry, yeah, the cristogali. Those were the 3 things on the inside. So, I'm sorry?
The sphenoid?
I'm sorry?
The sphenoid?
On this side.
Can you repeat those?
Right, so, I'm sorry. The cristogali, the sella turcica, and the foramen magnum. Those would be those 3 that you could see from the inside. Okay, so these would be that's where your brain attaches to, that's where your pituitary sits, and that's where your spinal column originates from. Okay, all this I'll do with you on Thursday, so don't panic or anything. I'm just orienting you about chapter 6 and 7 and how it relates to your list. Okay. Everybody clear? Okay. Okay. So, that's really your skull. That's really the main thing about your skull.
You have to know the features and the right?
Yes, if it's on the list, you have to know that. If it's on the list, you have to know it. Okay. Then you have your vertebrae. For the vertebrae, okay, I would expect you to know the number of the vertebrae when it is intact. For example, in this example. So I know I have 7 cervical. I know I have 12 thoracic. I have 5 lumbar. And then my sacrum. Okay. The little tailbone, my coccyx. Okay. So then how do I know that? Well, I have to count it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Cervical. That means 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Would be my thoracic. And then, of course, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 would be my lumbar. And then the rest is the sacrum. The sacrum is actually 5 bones that were fused together, and then the coccyx is added to it. Okay, so we just refer to the sacrum together by itself. So what about these guys? Well, the first 2 are important. Okay, for those of you who are able to see it from your bone box, okay, the first one, that's where your skull is going to sit. And it is the one that's going to allow me to go like this, because there's auricular surfaces on there. So I can go like this. That's my yes. That's my atlas. As opposed to the second one, it has the little point we call the dens. Okay? And so the dens is going to allow my head to turn about the axis. That's why it's called the axis. And that's what's going to allow me to turn to go no. Okay? So those are markings that are unique to these 2 bones, C1, C2. So you will have to know C1, C2 individually and be able to recognize them and the parts. Okay? For those of you who look kind of lost, I'm saying the stuff that are on your list. On your list. On your list. Okay? Okay. So, everybody with me so far?
Lord, are the C1 and C2 included in the cervical vertebrae?
Yes, they are. Yes, they are. They are part of the cervical. They are C1 is the atlas, C2 is the axis. And then you have 5 others, cervical. Notice the size of the cervical versus the thoracic versus the lumbar. They are small, there's less weight on them. And as opposed to the lumbar, they're much bigger bodies because there's more weight on them. Okay. Which of these 3 would the ribs attach to? The thoracic. So when we look at the thoracic vertebrae, they actually have a surface, an articular surface for the ribs, as opposed to your cervical and your lumbar would not have it. Okay, so it should